Brilliant. So that's how you open and close a zip. But how does it work? How do the teeth lock together? To show you that, we need to look inside the slider. Each side of the zip has a row of teeth with gaps in between. When the two sides of the zip are lined up, the teeth on one side are opposite the gaps on the other side. To close the zip, the slider is pulled down to the bottom and the pin is put inside it. Inside the slider, there are two bits called wedges with grooves in them. One wedge is higher than the other. The teeth of the zip fit into the grooves of the wedges, and when the slider is pulled up, it presses one row of teeth on top of the other row of teeth. This makes the teeth lock together tightly. When the slider is pulled down, the teeth are pulled apart from each other, and the zip is opened. It's really clever, isn't it? Right, this is a special microscope camera. It lets us see really small things in close detail, like our zip. I want to see if we can see those teeth locking together. This could be a bit fiddly, but let's give it a go. We can see it working. You can see the teeth disappearing into the metal slider. The chain goes around this large metal cog, which is attached to the pedals, and you can follow it back to the smaller metal cog, which is attached to the wheel. But to see how the chain makes the bike move, we need to take a closer look. When you push the pedals with your feet, they turn the big cog in the middle of the bike round and round. The big cog has teeth all around the edge, and the chain links have little holes in. The holes hook onto the teeth. When the pedals turn the big cog, the teeth pull the chain around too. At the other end of the chain is a smaller cog. This one is attached to the back wheel. As the chain is pulled around the big cog by the pedals, the holes hook onto the teeth on the little cog, which turns the back wheel and pushes the bike along. This means we can go zooming along on our bikes. Whee! How clever is that? It's a bit like it's sneezing. That was so much fun. Let's see it again in slow motion. Here comes the bin, tipping, tipping, and there goes the recycling. It looks amazing, but do you know how the hopper tips the bin? Let's find out. On bin day, your bin is wheeled to the back of the lorry and hooked onto a robotic arm at the back called the rear loader. When the bin is locked into position, the rear loader arm starts moving. The first part moves upwards, lifting the bin higher and higher. Then it starts to move backwards, and this tips the bin upside down. The lid tips open so that all the recycling falls out. Inside the lorry, the recycling falls into a big tank. Next, a moving wall pushes all the recycling to the back of the lorry, crushing it together. This means there's room for more recycling. This bit at the back, the hopper, is really clever, isn't it? And look, there go two more recycling bins. And remember, inside the lorry, you have a big moving wall that is pushing the recycling together to save space. Now you can see underneath the boat, and this is what makes it move. This is called a propeller. Here's a little toy boat. You might have one just like it to play with in the bath. And this one has propellers too. Can you see? The propeller looks a bit like a fan that goes round and round and cools you down, doesn't it? But on a real boat, the propeller is powered by an engine, and that's what makes the boat move. The engine and propeller are attached to each other. Petrol goes in the boat engine, and when it starts, it makes a big brum brum noise. Inside, the petrol starts to burn, and as it does, it creates a powerful gas. The gas pushes a long pole called a piston backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards. As the piston moves, it turns a cog at the bottom, and this cog turns another cog attached to the propeller outside the boat. As the propeller spins round and round, it pushes the boat through the water. How does it work? How do the horses go up and down? Well, if you look at the horse I'm sitting on, it's attached to a pole, and this pole goes all the way to the floor, but if you follow it up, it goes all the way up to the roof of the carousel, and that's called the canopy. But to see how this all works, you're going to need to go inside the canopy. In the middle of a carousel is a big pole called the centre pole. At the top of the centre pole is a big cog called a gear. It has lots of grooves on it. Sticking out from the gear are lots of rods called sweeps. It looks like a big bike wheel. Each sweep has grooves on the end, which sit on top of the grooves on the gear. When the big gear moves round in a circle, it pulls all the sweeps round, making them spin too. But how do the horses go up and down? At the end of each sweep is something called a crankshaft. The crankshaft has a pole hanging down from it, and on the end of that is a horse. When the crankshaft spins round, it moves the pole round too, and this pulls the horse below up and down. How clever is that? So we've seen how the driver uses the levers to move the boom around, but how does the boom get longer and shorter and move higher into the sky? To find out, we need to take a closer look. Here comes the crane. And there's the boom. To make the crane get longer and higher, there are special tubes called hydraulic cylinders underneath the boom. The tubes are full of water and oil. When a button is pressed in the cab, the water and oil are pumped upwards inside the tube. They have nowhere to go, and so this pushes the boom up. There are also hydraulic cylinders inside the boom. When another button is pushed, the water and oil inside these cylinders are pumped up too. This pushes the boom out, making it longer. But do you know how the crane picks things up? Different things can be attached to the end of the boom to pick things up in all sorts of ways. A fork to lift things up from the bottom. Or a grabber to grab hold of things, like a great big hand. Or a chain to pick things up from the top. There's something on the end of this boom. Do you know what this is? That's right, it's called a hook. And the crane uses the hook to hook onto things to pick them up. It's clever, isn't it? It's these little holes here all the way along that spray out the water. It's a bit like a big spinning shower. Let's discover how this dishwasher works. When the dishwasher is full of dirty pots and pans and the door is closed, we press the start button and the machinery inside springs into action. First, water starts pouring in through a little spout at the bottom. To get the dishes nice and clean, the water needs to be hot. So it's heated up by this. It's called the heating element, and as it gets hot, all the water around it gets hot too. Then it's time for some soap. You might hear that clunk noise if you listen really carefully outside a dishwasher. The soap mixes in with the water, and then it's pushed through a pipe to the spray arms. As the water is sprayed at the dishes really fast, all the bits of food are washed off. The dirty water is drained away and fresh water comes in to give everything a good rinse. Like washing shampoo out of your hair. Once all the water has gone again, the clean dishes are dried with hot air. Work the lock. When you put a key in a lock, it goes through the keyhole and into the metal tube called the barrel. Inside the barrel are lots of little metal pins, and each of these pins has a special position. As the key goes in, the teeth on the key push the pins down, and the pins then ping back into the gaps. Only if the pins are in their special position will you hear a click. This means you can turn the key, which makes the deadbolt move out to lock the door, or in, which unlocks the door so it can be opened. So these are all the teeth on my key, and some are longer than others. Can you see? Now, I want to see these teeth inside the special lock. Now, as the key goes in, can you see that the teeth are making the pins move up and down? Can you hear that? I love the sound of those pins clicking into their special positions. And once the pins are in the special position, I can now turn the key, which moves the deadbolt in and out, just like that. Listen to the sound of the water, all of that water spraying up into the smoke. The practice has ended and the firefighters can now turn the water off. But do you know how a fire hose works? Inside the fire engine is a big tank of water. At the back of the fire engine, there are some levers and switches. This is called the pump panel. This controls how much water will flow out of the engine to be used on the fire. Next to this is a large pump and a wheel called a rotor. When the lever is pulled, the rotor spins around very fast. The water flows into the spinning rotor, which creates something called water pressure, which pushes the water out of the hose really fast and really far, which puts out the fire. Isn't that interesting? Let's go to the back of the fire engine to see all of that happening. And the firefighters have given me special permission to use the fire hose. And remember, you should never try this yourself. I can only give it a go because I'm with specially trained firefighters. To make sure I'm safe, I need some protective clothing. Ta-da! But do you know how a hamster wheel works? Well, let's find out. This is a wheel just like the one in Herbert and Helena's cage. This bit inside is called the running track because that's where a hamster runs. And can you see, if you look closely, these little ridges on the inside of the running track? This is where a hamster uses its paw to grip onto the ridges and pushes the wheel around and round. Let's take a closer look to see how the wheel spins. Herbert's paws grip onto the ridges inside the hamster wheel, pushing the wheel behind him. As he runs, this makes the wheel go round and round. In the middle of the wheel, you can see a small piece of metal, like a rod. This is called the axle. At one end, the axle is fixed to the cage to keep it in place. At the other end, there is a small bolt which stops the wheel falling off. But the wheel can't spin until something moves it, which is where a hamster comes in. When a hamster like Herbert starts running, the wheel spins round and round on the axle. Let's see Herbert in action again, but this time in slow motion. You can see how Herbert's paws grip onto the ridges inside the wheel. As his legs push down, they push the wheel round behind him. We need to look in more detail. On top of the helicopter is the rotor. The long blades meet in the centre and are attached to a metal pole called the rotor mast. When the helicopter engine starts, the rotor mast starts to spin round and round, making the blades spin too. Another circle of metal, called the swash plate, also spins round. It's attached to the blades by two metal poles called control rods. These rods are connected to controls inside the helicopter cockpit. To make the helicopter take off, the pilot moves a lever upwards. This moves the control rods in the rotor, which makes the blades move. When the blades are in the right position, they push the air downwards, and this allows the helicopter to lift up into the air. The pilot pushes another lever to make the rotor tilt up at the back, and this makes the helicopter go forwards. To go backwards, the pilot pulls the lever back, which tips the rotor up at the front, so the helicopter goes backwards. Clever, isn't it? Shall we see the rotor working on this helicopter? But before we fly, the pilot and I need to put our headsets on. And I'm going to be talking through this. It's called a microphone, and it might make my voice sound funny. I think we're ready to go. Can you see that white bit hitting the strings? This bit, it's called a hammer, and it hits the strings when I press a key, which makes the strings vibrate. But to see exactly what's going on, we need to look deeper inside the piano. Every key is longer than it looks because it's actually part of a wooden lever. A lever is like a seesaw. When one end goes down, the other end goes up. At the end of the lever is the key. At the other end is the hammer. When a key is pressed, the end of the lever shoots upwards. This pushes another small lever up too. And it forces the hammer to hit the string so that it vibrates. As the string vibrates, it makes a musical note. When you stop pressing the key, the lever tips back and the hammer comes away from the string. Wow, how amazing is that? And we can see it in real life here. Look, when I press this key, it pushes the wooden lever to make the hammer hit the string. Here, they make almost 2,000 bus ramps every year for buses all over the world. Here's what the ramp looks like before it goes into a bus. Let's take a closer look. Underneath the bus, next to the wheels, are airbags called bellows. They're full of air and keep the bus level. When the driver presses a button inside the bus, an electric signal goes to the bellows to tell them to let some air out. As the air comes out, the bus gets lower on one side. It's a bit like letting the air out of a rubber ring. When the bus is level with the pavement, the driver presses another button to make the ramp come out. Under the doors, there's a hidden box. Inside the box is a bar fixed to the ramp. When the driver presses the button, the bar moves forward and pushes the ramp out. When the ramp rests on the pavement, it's ready to be used. And then the ramp goes away. The bellows fill back up, and the bus drives off. Well, to find out, we need to look deeper inside the toilet. When you press the flush button, it moves a lever, which pulls a plug out of a hole at the bottom of the cistern. Fresh water flushes out of the cistern into the toilet bowl below. The water is so powerful that it pushes through the old water and your wee or poo out through the pipe at the bottom of the toilet bowl. When the water has left the cistern, air travels up the pipe. It makes a funny gurgling noise. So that's how a flush works. Have you heard that gurgly sound before? Let's listen out for it, shall we? Ready? Here comes the gurgle. So now you know that that noise is the sound of air travelling up the pipe to stop the flush. But I want to see inside the cistern when the toilet is being flushed. And this is how a water pump works. Underneath the pool is a tank called the sump. The water is sucked up from the sump and into a big pipe. It's a bit like sucking a drink with a straw. The water travels along the pipe to a big spinning wheel. The wheel spins the water around very fast and pushes it up another pipe. The water is pushed up and up until it reaches the top of the slide. Now, gravity makes it fall down the slide, and when it gets to the end, it whooshes into the swimming pool. At the side of the swimming pool is a hole called an inlet. Some of the water goes into the hole so that the pool doesn't overflow. It's a bit like the hole on the side of your bathtub. This water goes through a filter which cleans it and then along the last pipe into the sump, where it's ready to be used again. How interesting is that? So this pipe here is the one that sucks the water up from the sump, which is just behind this wall, and inside this blue bit of machinery is the spinning wheel which whizzes the water around really fast and pushes it up to the top of the water slide. It looks a bit like a blue snail, doesn't it? Let's see what happens when Mike turns the pump on. Ooh, listen to the sound of the pump. Wait a minute, there's another stage. Oh, that's the sound of the spinning wheel whizzing round and round, and all that water being pushed up to the top of the slide. Can you hear? It's gone quite firm. It took just a few minutes to cook, but what's going on inside the egg to make it go white and hard? To find out, we need to take a closer look. Here comes a chicken. Inside the chicken, a little egg grows. It gets bigger and bigger until it pops out. Thank you! The egg is cracked into the pan. Inside egg whites and yolks are lots of very, very tiny things called proteins floating in liquid. They are so tiny we can't see them with our eyes. Each protein is twisted and curled up. When the egg is heated, the proteins start to uncurl and join together. As the egg gets hotter and the chains join up, they make a crisscross pattern which traps the liquid inside. As this happens, the egg turns white and the yolk goes hard. How brilliant is that? All of that going on inside one egg. Well, I've got one egg for my tea, but I think I want two. So let's cook another one, but this time use my special camera. This is a thermal camera and it shows me what's hot and what's cold using different colours. You should never play on an escalator, but I've got special permission to take a closer look. Can you see how the steps just disappear here at this metal yellow edge? It looks a bit like a comb, doesn't it? The steps go underneath and disappear, but where do they go and where do the steps come from? Well, to find out, we need to look inside and underneath an escalator. Inside an escalator, the stairs are linked together in one big loop. It moves round and round. The stairs are attached to two sets of wheels called gears, one at the top and one at the bottom. The gears at the top of the escalator, pulled round by chains, they look a bit like a bike chain. The gears at the bottom run along a track like a train. The gears have teeth on them, and when they turn, they pull the loop of stairs around with them. Each step has small wheels on it. When a step reaches the top, the chain pulls the wheels around the gear until the step is flat again. It stays flat until it gets all the way back to the bottom, ready to go round again.
So the brake pads, the caliper and the brake disc all make the car slow down and stop. But to find out how the brakes work, we need to look inside the car.
When a car is moving, the wheels on the car turn round. Behind each wheel is a metal circle called a brake disc. This goes round at the same speed as the wheel. To make the car slow down, the driver presses the brake pedal inside the car with their foot. The brake pedal moves a lever which pushes against a metal cylinder with springs inside it. As the springs are squeezed, a special liquid called brake fluid is released. The brake fluid travels down a pipe to the wheel and it flows into the caliper. This pushes the brake pads onto the brake disc and slows it down until the wheels and the car stop moving.
So that's how brakes work. The mechanic has taken the car wheel off for us. So now we can clearly see the brake disc, the caliper and the brake pads. But I've got some other brake pads for us to get a close look at. These are brake pads. One of them is new and one of them is old. When cake mix goes into a hot oven, it starts to bake. It will rise and get bigger and bigger and turn into a tasty sponge. But to find out how, we need to get a closer look.
When the ingredients are mixed together, they start to change. This is called a chemical reaction. First, the baking powder and the milk start to react together, making bubbles of air. The air bubbles are surrounded by a layer of fat from the butter, which traps them inside the mixture. Then, when the mixture goes into the oven, the hot air inside makes the egg white surround each bubble and go hard. This protects the bubbles so that they don't burst. As the mixture heats up more, the trapped air bubbles start to get bigger. As they grow, the flour in the mixture around them starts to stretch. It stretches and stretches until it can't stretch anymore. And by then, the cake is ready.
It's really clever, isn't it? My cake takes 20 minutes to bake, so I'm going to use my special camera to do something called a time lapse.
This means we can film something that takes a long time, but when we watch it back, we can see it happening really quickly.
Right, the camera is in place, so we've got to wait 20 minutes until the cake is ready. Like that for Madison and Malika, but look what happens if I try to open it. Does it work? No. Why do you think that is? That's because this cat flap will only work for Madison and Malika. But how does the cat flap know who they are? It's because of this. It's called a microchip, and this, a sensor on the cat flap.
Let's see how it works. Both Madison and Malika had a microchip put underneath their fur by the vet. It didn't hurt them and it's very small, so they can't feel it at all. Their microchips have the same special number on them. This number is also on the sensor inside the cat flap, so they match. When one of the cats goes up to their cat flap, the sensor inside scans the microchip by their neck, just like how we scan our shopping at the supermarket checkout. When it sees there is a match, a small lock inside the cat flap is unlocked. So when they push the flap with their head, the flap swings open to let them through. The same happens when they want to come home. But the cat flap only opens for Madison and Malika. If any other cats come along, they can't get in because they don't have the same matching number.
I can feel the cuff getting tighter and tighter. It's a bit like having your arms squeezed, but it doesn't hurt. When it's ready, we'll hear a little beep, and that will tell Amanda it's ready so she can check my blood pressure. And that was the beeping sound. If you look at the monitor, you can see there are 2 numbers, and those numbers will tell Amanda if my blood pressure is okay. Amanda, how's my blood pressure?
It's fine today, Maddie.
Thank you.
So my blood pressure is nice and healthy.
But how does the cuff tightening around my arm tell the machine and Amanda that my blood pressure is okay? Well, to find out, we need to see what's going on inside my body when my blood pressure is being taken.
Your heart pumps blood all around your body. With each heartbeat, it pumps blood through lots of little tubes called blood vessels. Having good blood pressure means your blood is flowing nice and easily around your body. It's not going too fast or too slow. When your blood pressure is checked, the cuff on the monitor fills with air and it gets bigger and bigger. The bigger it grows, the tighter it gets on your arm. This squeezes the blood vessels so the machine can measure how easily the blood is travelling through. The doctor can tell what your blood pressure is by the numbers shown on the machine.
But do you know how magnets work? Let's find out.
How does it work?
A magnet.
Magnets are made of metal and they're really fun to play with. Look what happens when you put 2 magnets together like this. It feels like they're pulling towards each other until eventually, snap, they pull together.
Did you hear the snap sound the magnet's made?
But look what happens if I turn this carriage the other way round and use this magnet instead. No matter how hard I try to push them together, they just don't want to connect. This time it feels like they're pushing away from each other. Why does this happen?
On the end of each train carriage are magnets. They look the same but are actually different. Every magnet has 2 sides called poles. One side is called the North Pole and the other side is called the South Pole. And the whole magnet is surrounded by an invisible area called a magnetic field. When a North Pole magnet goes into the magnetic field of a South Pole magnet, they're pulled together. But when you turn them around so that the South Poles face each other, the magnetic field pushes them away. And the same happens if all the North Poles face each other. Only the opposites. A North and a South Pole will pull the magnets together.
Careful, make sure you get a grown-up to do this bit for you though, because it's very hot. And there they are, ready to eat. But what happens inside the bag? How does a small kernel of corn turn into a piece of popcorn like this?
Every kernel of corn has a hard shell on the outside and a soft layer of white stuff called starch on the inside. And inside the starch, there's a tiny droplet of water. When the corn is heated, the starch melts and the drop of water starts to expand, which means it gets bigger. Eventually, it gets so hot, it starts to turn into steam, like when water boils in a kettle. The steam builds up inside the kernel of corn and pushes against the hard shell. Eventually, it can't hold it anymore and the pressure bursts the shell with a pop. As it pops, the starch pours out and immediately cools into the soft white bit we see when we look at popcorn. Let's see it for real, shall we?
My special camera will show us how. Let's take a look.
Because I couldn't put my special camera in the microwave, I filmed this popcorn being cooked in a pan. It pops exactly the same way. Wow, there they go. See how high the corn jumps? It's very quick. time for some bubbles.
The still water is made fizzy by these two tanks. This tank is called a carbonation tank. It makes the water fizzy by pushing a gas called carbon dioxide into the water. Here's how it works.
Water contains a gas called oxygen. To make the water fizzy, we need to remove the oxygen. Inside the tank is a metal plate with holes in it, like a sieve. The holes are so small that as the water squeezes through them, the oxygen gas escapes, and it's taken away through a vent at the top of the tank. Bye-bye, oxygen. Now the oxygen is removed, we can make the water fizzy. The water with no oxygen in it is sent to the second big tank. Here, carbon dioxide gas is pushed into the water very, very fast. As more and more carbon dioxide bubbles fill the tank of water, pressure builds up. This makes the bubbles dissolve into the water so that we can't see them anymore. And now the water is fizzy. The pressure is like a balloon ready to burst. And it stays like this as the water is put into bottles. We only see the bubbles again when the bottle is opened. The pressure is released, we hear a big fizzing sound, and the bubbles rush to the surface.
What? It's cold. So, how does it get hot? To make the water hot, we need one of these. A boiler. There are lots of different types of boiler, and you might have one in your house. Let's find out how this one makes the water hot.
The water from a reservoir goes through a building to be cleaned. It's then sent by pipes to our homes. One of the ways cold water is heated in your house is by a boiler. Inside the boiler is a small tank. The water gets heated there by a row of flames or electricity. When it's hot, the water is sent out through another pipe to a much bigger tank. This big tank is called a cylinder. Inside it, there is a big heated coil which keeps all the water warm until you want to use it. When you turn the hot water tap on, it lets water from the cylinder tank travel along the pipe, into the tap and out into your bathtub.
It's lovely and warm.